Hello everyone. Tonight I'm going to tell you about bees, a topic we all think we know a little about. But bees still have many surprises to reveal. For example, the number of species of bees, over 20,000 species. And these species are very diverse in their size, their appearance, and their behaviors. They are not all social bees, like the well-known honeybees. Some are solitary. And when it comes to social bees, of which we will talk extensively tonight, their ways of communication and the organization of their hives never fail to amaze. Bees also play a big role in different terrestrial ecosystems because, as you know, they are one of the main agents of pollination. And we will see how this works. So there are many things to discuss, but we are going to take all of this in order. We never rush anything here. So, first, adopt a comfortable position. This is going to be a long dive. And so, if at any time you wish to let go and fall asleep, just do it, and you can always come back later, another time, to keep listening. There are timestamps in the description, on your screen, and in the first comment pinned under this video. Together with the timestamps, you will find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and other audio streaming apps, if you prefer to listen to my stories there. And a link to my Patreon page, if you wish to support this channel and get all the perks that come with it. Downloads, surveys, ad-free videos, now that YouTube plays ads on all videos. The possibility to listen to all episodes as podcasts directly on Patreon or on your favorite podcast app. There are also previews and early releases. And finally, before we begin, I also invite you to check Lights Out Library and La Biblioteca de los Sueños, the two podcasts in English and Spanish respectively, that consist of my stories edited and retold by my partner in these, Olimpia. It's going well for us. Last week, Lights Out Library made it to the top 200 of most listened podcasts on Spotify in the US. It is also in the top 200 in Canada. So this show really has found its audience, and we have started publishing bonus episodes that are written specifically for it. One about the life of Frida Kahlo, the Mexican artist, was recently released on the podcast's Patreon. In both languages, English and Spanish, I invite you to check Lights Out Library and La Biblioteca de los Sueños. And now, let's get started with tonight's story. When we talk about bees, what comes to mind are honeybees, especially the most common species of honeybees, the Western or European honeybee. We all know what they look like, and that they are social insects. Around the queen, they form a colony, also called a nest or a hive. A large group of thousands of individuals that occupy different functions, and in which bees build structures, cells, made of beeswax. cells in which they store food, honey or pollen, and they house their young. And a young bee starts with an egg that becomes a larva until they transform all the way to become an adult, and they exit their cell to start working for the colony. You know all this, and we will talk extensively about honeybees. But before, it is important to bear in mind that honeybees are only a dozen of species, the most common one being the western honeybee. There are thousands more species of bees, more than 20,000. Some are stingless, they do not all produce honey, and they are not all social neither. Many bees are solitary and form small temporary nests with their direct offspring. To understand bees better, to locate them among other species, and understand how they are related to other insects, let's take a look at the classification, the tree of species. In terms of scientific classification, insect is what is called a class. That is to say, a very large group that contains various orders, suborders, and families of species. These are all different levels of classification. Insects are part of an even larger group, the arthropods. Arthropods are animals that have an exoskeleton that contains their organs, as opposed to vertebrates like us, that are made of an internal skeleton that serves as a structure, a support for our bodies, a support that is surrounded with organs, flesh, and a circulatory system. In other words, we are hard inside and soft outside, and arthropods are the opposite. They are hard outside because their skeletons contain their organs. Arthropods actually appeared very early, it is believed, when the first multicellular animals appeared on Earth. They appeared before the vertebrates. But even though this type of body structure with an exoskeleton is ancient, it never disappeared, and the group of arthropods is very diverse. It has up to 10 million different species that include not only all insects, but also arachnids, crustaceans, trilobites or centipedes. So insects are a class of arthropods. And within the insects class, there are more subgroups, which are called orders. Bees belong to an order of insects called Hymenoptera. Insects of this order share a particular way of development when they are young, something called holometabolism, a form of development that includes different stages: egg, then larva, then pupa, and finally imago, that is to say adult. And once they are adult, their development ends. We will take a look at this in more detail later when we explore a hive. The order Hymenoptera is itself divided into suborders and superfamilies. Bees belong to a suborder called Apocrita, a suborder that also includes wasps and ants. These three families of insects, bees, wasps, and ants, are considered to be cousins. They don't descend from one another, but it is believed that they share a common ancestor. And the moment when these different branches diverged is not exactly known, but we are speaking dozens of millions of years. Hymenoptera insects originated in the Triassic period, that is to say 200 to 250 million years ago. And bees themselves would have appeared during the early Cretaceous, about 124 million years ago. This means they were on this planet 120 million years before the first hominidae even existed. They preceded us by a long shot. And as a group of species, they have survived multiple extinction events since then. The closeness or the family relation between bees, wasps, and ants is not that surprising when you think about it. Their bodies look different, obviously, but they have the same structure. A big head, an abdomen, the same number of legs, the same functions in their bodies in the same place. They go through the same development phases, and even the social organization of some of their species look alike. Speaking of the way bees live, I was telling you that all of them were not social. Actually, only a minority of bee species live in large groups, and their sociality ranges from completely solitary to highly eusocial. Eusociality is the name given to the highest possible level of sociality, of integration and cooperation between individuals. In such a group, there is a strict division of labor, a cooperation to take care of the brood, and the overlapping of generations within a colony. Specific individuals don't really matter. Their life is dedicated to maintaining a colony that will survive them. Honeybees are typically eusocial insects. But if we take a look at different species of bees, from less to more social, we find a lot of species that are purely solitary. Solitary here means that every female of the species is fertile and will dedicate its efforts to constructing and inhabiting a nest just for itself and its direct offspring. So in such a case, there is no division of labor. This bee works, eventually defends the nest if needed, lay eggs, and will not necessarily interact with other bees. The most common behavior observed among these solitary bees is that they nest in the ground or in trees in small holes. They make little compartments or cells with debris of wood or dirt that they use as building material. They don't produce wax generally, and when a cell is ready, they lay an egg inside, put some food, typically flower pollen and nectar, for the larva that will come out of the egg, and then they seal the cell, and it's mission accomplished. They lose interest in it. Some species will then move on to make another nest, and others will make different cells in the same nest. But after one or several nests have been completed, the bee will die without having ever taken care of its offspring. By themselves, The young larvae that are protected inside these cells grow to become pupae, then adults, and they escape from the cell, and the cycle goes on. But there are variations among these many species of solitary bees. Some will tend to make their nests near the nests of other bees. They will not collaborate with them, but they live close to one another, maybe for protection or to increase the chances of mating when the young adults, male and female, leave the nests. There are also examples of species in which several females nest together. Each will make and provision their own cells, but they share a common nest, so they are not fully social, but they are called communal. Their organization may look like a tiny colony, but it is not one. They are just roommates, sharing a nest, and each has its own life and procreation, without any function of the nest being put in common, and no labor specialization. Common examples of solitary bees include carpenter bees, which are quite common around the world, especially in North America. Carpenter bees are all dark and not aggressive at all. They will only sting when in a desperate situation, if ever. And their name, carpenter bees, comes from their inclination to nest in wood, in dead wood or bamboo, that they dig to build their nest. Even though they are solitary bees, because they do not specialize, and all females are fertile, carpenter bees often live with other members of the species, in common nests that are often multi-generational. Carpenter bees can live up to 3 years, which is quite old for a bee. For comparison, among honeybees, the average worker lives only 1 year. And so carpenter bees have time to see their daughters, and later even their granddaughters, be born in the same nest, where they all stay. So various generations may share the nest, in good intelligence, even though they will not cooperate further, as I said. Another example of solitary bee is the leafcutter, another species that is called like this because they chew leaves or petals into fragments that they use in their nests, in particular to line the cells of their nests. It is believed it helps prevent the desiccation of the food inside. It insulates the cell and provides a bit of moisture. To the general public, like you and me, these bees are very hard to distinguish from honeybees. They look the same, so we probably see them regularly and take them for honeybees. Yet another example of solitary bee is the mason bee, a name given to several species because they build their nests with mud, typically in natural gaps like cracks in stones or other small cavities. There are different species of mason bees, but they are easy to distinguish from honeybees because of their colors. They are often metallic green or metallic blue, so they can be mistaken for big flies, and some are also blackish like carpenter bees. But their life cycle is similar to the species I mentioned before. Females build cells where they put their egg with food, they seal them, and the new bee will do the rest inside the cell until it reaches maturity and exits to live its life. But what about the males, the drones? They exit their cells like the females, and typically they remain near, waiting for females to be born. It has been observed that some males actually extract females from their cells. That's how impatient they are. Because when the females emerge, they immediately mate with one or several males, and without any wait, the female already starts looking for food and a place to build its nest. The males die soon after, almost immediately. They typically only live for a few days, and once their task of participating in reproduction is accomplished, they die. Now let's take a closer look at the beginning of this life cycle. What is inside this egg, and how do new bees really form? The egg contains an embryo that feeds on the egg's nutritive content. And this embryo develops into a larva. What is a larva exactly? In different species, especially insects but not only, amphibians like frogs have larvae too. A larva is a juvenile, but one that is morphologically very different from the adult. It will undergo metamorphosis into the next stage of its life to turn into an adult. So, in the comfort and the protection of the cell, the larva that hatches from the egg consumes the food left by the adult bee, or that the bees give it when the care of the young is done in common. The larva gains weight and energy for the next stage, the pupa stage. From Latin pupa, which means doll. What causes this transformation? It is encoded in DNA, but what controls it is a cocktail of hormones. Hormones that are produced by the larva determine the processes of entering and completing the pupal stage. So at this point, the bee larva will make a cocoon, inside which the metamorphosis will take place. This is a similar process that happens to butterflies. The caterpillar is the larva of butterflies. It generally feeds by itself. It is not left with food inside a cell like bees, but it is the same process, the same logic. Once the larva is ready, hormones make it transition to the pupa stage, which is also called chrysalis in the case of butterflies. And inside the cocoon that they create, the metamorphosis takes place. An adult individual forms, typically looking very different from the larva. And when it is ready, it emerges from the dead skin of the pupa. This empty exoskeleton of the pupa is called an exuvia. In the case of most hymenopterans, like bees, wasps, or ants, this exuvia is very thin and light. It has almost no substance, so as the new bee emerges from it, it becomes crumpled and loses its shape. But for that part of their life cycle, bees are like butterflies and other insects. They go through stages that dramatically change their appearance. And there is no such thing as a baby bee looking like a bee but smaller. The baby bee is a larva. Now, all bees do not spin cocoons when they transition to the pupa stage. First and foremost, cocoons are protective barriers that serve to protect from predators and possibly pathogens while the metamorphosis takes place inside. But it is unknown why some species of bees make cocoons and others not. They all grow in cells that were sealed when they were an egg, or that are underguard protected if they were born into a colony. So in theory they are protected from the outside environment. But still, some species will spin an additional cocoon and others not. How long does it take to go from egg to adult? Not that long, actually. It depends on the species, but the order of magnitude is a few weeks at most. The pupal stage itself, when the organism is completely redesigned internally and externally to go from a little tube like a larva is to a fully formed insect, this only lasts 1 or 2 weeks. Bees are protected by their cells, and when they are social by the colony, they will soon be born into. But this quick transformation among insects may be a good defense mechanism that was selected after many generations. The pupal stage is dangerous. The individual is consuming a lot of energy to go through this phase. In a majority of cases, it is unable to move or defend itself. It is exposed to weather conditions. So it becomes very vulnerable. This means that a quick transformation in a few days rather than weeks or months is an advantage, because it shortens this period when they are unprotected and unable to escape. As often in nature, there are atypical and surprising behaviors from a few species. An example with bees is a few parasitic species, such as the cuckoo bumblebee. Bumblebee is a general term for over 250 species of one family of bees, from the genus Bombus. Their bodies are rounder than honeybees. Most bumblebees are social and they form colonies with a queen, even though these colonies are much smaller than for honeybees, and they can have only 50 members sometimes. The cuckoo bumblebee is different. It is called brood parasitic, like the cuckoo bird. They steal nests instead of making their own. A cuckoo bumblebee queen starts by invading another bumblebee nest and killing its resident queen to take its place. Then they start laying eggs, their own eggs that will turn into cuckoo bumblebees. But the workers of the colony are abused, and they care for these eggs that are not even their own kind. Their workforce is being hijacked by the cuckoo bumblebee. So, as you see, the way bees live is much more diverse than the well-known colony organization in a hive. But obviously, bees stand out for the social capabilities of some of their species, especially honeybees. There are different levels of sociality depending on animal species, Various individuals can live together, but it doesn't mean that every group works the same. For example, mammals are often social, they live in groups, but generally they don't strongly specialize. Sometimes they hunt together, but each adult individual is able to look for their own food. Reproduction is not limited to a queen. All male and female individuals remain fertile. And even though caring for the youngs is sometimes a shared task, it is primarily their mother that does it. Bees go much further than that, like wasps or ants. They form a society in which individuality disappears completely behind the function. Worker, soldier, reproductor. Individuals are grown to fill one of these functions, and it determines everything about their life, including their behavior and their appearance. They are programmed even before they were born. The food they are given makes them evolve a certain way. In such a society, the reproductive function is limited to one queen per colony. A bigger individual that has mated and can lay up to 1 million of eggs, giving birth to as many daughters, workers that will make the colony function and be unable to reproduce themselves. From time to time, a few males and potential queens that can keep the colony working or fund another are produced, and this is how the species spreads. This type of extreme sociality, which is very different from ours and most animal species, is called eusociality. I told you about it more in details in a previous story about ants. Hymenopterans have this propensity to be eusocial, and so are termites, and there is one example of mammal that has been found to be eusocial, but it is little known, the mole rat, which is an ugly little rodent that lives in the Horn of Africa and parts of Kenya. So there is this story about ants if you wish to know more about eusociality. But now, let's take a look at how honeybees live, communicate, and maintain their colonies that can house tens of thousands of bees. A new colony begins with a process called swarming, a phenomenon that typically happens in spring. Worker bees can create special types of round cells called queen cups or queen cells. In these particular cells, regular eggs will be placed, but the way the larva will be fed will determine its development into a queen. Queens are only fed royal jelly, which is a substance rich in protein that young worker bees produce with glands on their heads. All bees receive some royal jelly, regardless of their sex or their future caste, their future function. But future queens are fed exclusively with it, and in large amounts, whereas future workers receive a mixture called bee bread or bee pollen, which is what you see on the legs of bees when they fly from flower to flower to collect pollen and nectar from flowers. They make these little yellow or orange balls on their legs with these two substances mixed. Balls that are rich in sugars, proteins and vitamins. This mixture is the basic ingredient for honey. Worker bees will swallow and regurgitate it into cells. The activity of their enzymes, contained in their saliva, and the evaporation of liquid transforms this sugary mixture into honey, which is viscous and thick. And they keep it inside the hive, stored in honeycombs to feed the colony after spring and summer, when supply of nectar and pollen in flowers will end. So it is the difference in food that determines whether an egg will give birth to a sterile worker or a queen. But there is another category of bees that are born in these cells, a minority of males that serve only for reproduction. They do not work, but they live as long as they mate with a queen, after which they fall to the ground and die, their destiny fulfilled. It is generally age that makes an old queen start laying eggs in queen cups. As the larva grows in them, the workers expand the cell, because the future queen is going to be a bit bigger than a regular worker, and the different size and different shape of this cell indicates that its inhabitant has to be fed only with royal jelly until the new queen reaches maturity and exits the cell. At this point, it is only a virgin queen that can theoretically reproduce, but has not mated yet. Mated with a drone. Several virgin queens may be born at the same time, but often only one survives, because their instinct pushes them to look for rivals and eliminate them as soon as possible by stinging them. But not their mother, the old reigning queen, because generally this one leaves the hive with part of the workers before the daughters are born. They form a swarm that will follow the queen and look for a place to build a new colony. When we see a big mass of bees in a tree or any kind of support, bees that are just staying stuck together without building or inhabiting a structure, this is a swarm. They will not stay where they are. They have scout bees that are looking for a place where they could build a new colony. And as soon as they find it, they will all leave to this new place. Back in the colony where new queens have been born, one or a few of them, if several have survived, will then fly to a drone congregation area, a zone where male and female bees can meet to mate. And there, the virgin queens will mate with 12 to 15 different drones. None of these gets lost. The young queen, which is no longer virgin, but now mated, stores up to 6 million sperm in its abdomen, sperm that will be selectively released over the following years to fertilize the eggs. The drones die, and the young queen goes back home. Her life outside is now over for a long time. Timing can vary, but generally a new queen goes to the mating area only 6 to 10 days after it emerged. Mating can last 1 or 2 days, and after that, she will no longer leave the colony, except several years later as an old queen, when she herself produces new queens, so a new cycle can begin. Once back at the hive, the work of giving birth to the next generations of bees begins. Helped by the workers, the queen lays dozens and then hundreds of eggs every day, which are taken care of by the workers. The workers feed her continuously, because laying these eggs is exhausting. A well-fed and well-mated queen can lay about 1,500 eggs per day during spring. This is more than her own weight in eggs every day. So she is constantly surrounded by workers that feed and hydrate her, take away the waste and the eggs that constantly form and get out of the queen. The eggs are placed in cells, and the larvae inside will be fed and protected until they end their metamorphosis and exit, generally as workers, to immediately start working for the colony. How long does it last for a queen? It depends, but it can range from 2 to 7 years. They live longer than workers. The queen does not stay always in the same place inside the hive, like an ant queen would, for example. Queen bees move above the cells that have been built by the workers, and they lay the eggs inside the cells. The queen decides the sex of the eggs she lays. If they are fertilized, a female individual will appear. If not, it will be a male. And she knows what to lay because of the size of the cells that the workers have prepared. Most of the cells are smaller and for female workers. A few ones are larger and will be for drones for males. In queen cells, the queen will obviously lay a female egg, but the workers are the ones that build these cells. How do they know that time has come to raise new queens? They receive instructions from the queen via a pheromone, a chemical factor that is secreted by the queen and most of the time inhibit their instinct to construct queen cells. When the queen ages, she stops releasing this pheromone, or the quantity of pheromone diminishes. The workers are no longer inhibited, and they make the queen cells where new queens will be raised. I told you before that virgin queens were only slightly bigger than workers before mating, and not easy to distinguish from workers. This changes after mating, when they return to the hive and start laying eggs. They grow and become significantly bigger than the average bee. Typically, they have twice the length, that is to say, a bit less than 1 inch or 2 centimeters. So in short, this is how the queen in a colony is replaced, and also how a colony can survive the death of the queen, or her departure in a swarm, and keep existing regardless. If several queens of the same colony mate successfully as the colony is still in swarm mode, the colony will split into as many smaller groups that depart and look for a place to create a new nest. But beware for the mated queen that returns to a colony where another mated queen is already installed. There is no place for the two of them, and typically the intruder, the second one to arrive, will be attacked and killed by the workers that do not recognize her as their queen. Just a quick vocabulary observation, by the way. We used to say hive or beehive for the nest of any bee colony. But in scientific and professional beekeeping literature, a hive is not the same as a nest. A nest is a natural or artificial cavity used by a colony of bees, but a place that was not intended for that use. Whereas a hive is man-made. It is one of these little houses for bees that beekeepers maintain and that make the harvesting of beekeeping products, honey, wax, royal jelly, so much easier, because a nest built by honeybees will always have similar structures with honeycombs, but it can take any shape and could not be harvested without completely destroying it. We will return to beekeeping in a minute. Apart from these short swarming periods, what activities take place in the nest or the beehive, apart from their reproductive function? Collecting and storing food is central, as we have seen, and a large number of workers are sent out to collect pollen and nectar in flowers. This is where they play their role as pollinizers, as you know. Flying from flower to flower, the bees transport inadvertently little grains of pollen that carry the genetic material of plants and will fertilize plants of the same species. Bees are not the only insects doing this, but their role is very important because of their numbers and their presence all around the world. There would actually probably be no flowers if it wasn't for pollinizing insects. The necessity flowers correspond to, with their colors and their scent, is to attract insects for pollination. And they exchange this service against food, in particular the sweet nectar that insects find at the center of the flower, which forces them to get covered in pollen to reach the nectar. So workers bring back these little balls of pollen and nectar that are a food source, but one that is available only in spring and summer when there are flowers. Food also has to be stored, and this is where honey is important. Honey is stored food for the cold month. Food that is stored inside hexagonal cells made of wax, of beeswax. Why would bees make cells shaped like hexagons, with 6 sides? There is a logical justification to it. This hexagonal shape is optimal to optimize strength, available storage space, and the quantity of building material of wax that is needed. If they made squares or triangles, it would be more fragile. But how do the bees know that and plan to make hexagonal cells? Actually, a theory is that they may not know that they are constructing hexagons in their honeycombs. They don't build one wall at a time. Instead, they dig holes into what will become a honeycomb, holes that are like tubes, circular, into soft wax. the wax is kept soft by the heat of the bees working around it. And when the wax solidifies, when it gets colder, it hardens in the way that is energetically the most efficient, which happens to be this hexagonal pattern. So the reason for this hexagonal shape of the cells is not that the bees would be genius mathematicians. It would just happen like this because it is energetically logical. But still, it doesn't take anything away from the cooperation capabilities of the bees and their construction capacity. They produce the wax themselves in special glands that all workers have on their abdomen. But how do they coordinate and communicate between them? A lot of their behavior is pure instinct. They are programmed for it. Depending on their caste, on their function, they will automatically start working or trying to mate without second thoughts. But this is not enough to function on a daily basis. A colony also needs to adapt to an environment, to defend against intruders, to go look for a place to nest or to collect food. And this requires communication. The communication of bees appears to be particularly rich. It was observed that the first mean of communication they have is dance. For example, a foraging bee, on return to the nest, will indicate where it found a good food source with a specific series of moves on the comb, in close circles, alternating right and left. This language is still not perfectly understood, but it works. Other workers will observe the dance and know where to go, the direction, the distance. Another means of communication is called the shaking signal. A bee holds another bee with its front legs and will vibrate its body. It is believed that this move, which is very often executed by foraging bees, on bees that are about to go foraging, is another way of transmitting information about food. Then there is chemical communication via pheromones. I mentioned earlier these pheromones of the queen that inhibit the construction of queen cups. But these are just one example of pheromone communication, among many. There are many activities for which bees release pheromones: mating, alarm, defense, colony recognition, orientation. So when we see a big group of bees that seems chaotic, in reality they are all intensely communicating at any time and reacting to information provided by others. This is typical of a new social group in which the colony works only with the contribution of each of its parts and functions like a superorganism. We have seen that bees were ancient, that they were diverse in their appearance and ways of life. But what about the relation between bees and humans? Most bee species are wild, the western honeybee being often considered a domesticated species. But there is still a debate about its degree of domestication. Because it is true that honeybees have been selected for several features that are seen as desirable. compared with wild bees. They are more resistant to disease and cold weather. They are less aggressive. They can be easily numbed with smoke. They don't swarm very often. They produce a lot of honey. But on the other hand, they have not changed much their behavior or their morphology, like domesticated animals usually do. They just were selected among different species, and they accepted to move into these man-made houses. And why wouldn't they? Because these little houses are perfect for them. It is hard to say exactly when apiculture, beekeeping, started. We know from paintings on cave walls found in Spain and in France that people collected honey from nests of wild bees around at least 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. It could well have started earlier than that, but we have no proof. Domestication, or beekeeping, is attested in ancient Egypt in the 3rd millennium BC. And we know the Egyptians were big consumers of honey. This is the oldest proof of beekeeping ever discovered, so it is supposed that beekeeping started in Egypt. But it is not fully proven either. Apart from honey, another valuable product that bees provided for thousands of years was beeswax. The first use of wax was for candles. There were other methods of candle making, with animal fat, for example. But beeswax was the superior material for that. It was precious, and it could also be used for seals, as a lubricant, or to maintain wooden furniture, or even in painting as an ingredient. Nowadays, natural beeswax is too rare and expensive for industrially produced candles and wax objects. But there remains a production of upscale candles made of beeswax, an artisanal production. They are often given an appearance that reminds of a honeycomb with the hexagons. Apart from these well-known products of beekeeping, there are others, such as bee bread or bee pollen, this raw material produced by foraging bees as they collect food. This is edible by humans, but not very frequent because it is not as interesting as honey or other products, and it can cause allergies. It sounds a bit gross, but there is also bee brood, used as food. This is the mixture made of eggs, larvae and pupae of honeybees that can be consumed. It is very nutritive, rich in proteins and vitamins, but not everyone is excited by the prospect of eating this. And then there is propolis, which is a resinous mixture collected by bees. They find resin on tree buds or sap flows and use it as a sealant, a building material in their hives, in their nests. Collected from hives and as a tincture, propolis is sold as a cold and flu remedy. And finally, one last valuable subproduct of beekeeping is royal jelly. This secretion produced by young workers used to feed the larvae and the queen. It is often marketed as a superfood with important health benefits, which are still debated because the health benefits remain to be proven. But royal jelly is yet another very nutritive, well-known beekeeping product. And at least apart from potential allergies, it is not dangerous. We have reached the end of our little exploration journey for tonight. There is so much more to the world of bees, so I hope it makes you want to discover more. But this is all for tonight, and you can now let go and fall asleep, or pick another story from my library if you don't feel sleepy yet. I will be back soon with another one. And in the meantime, sleep well, sweet dreams, au revoir.